Hello, I am Kelly Lewis,
And I'm Tiffany Jones.
and we are your revenue insiders. So we have the wonderful Hyo with us today. Hyo is VP of Finance at Highspot. Hyo and I have worked together for, I think, the last 3 years. Is that right, Hyo? Maybe two and a half?
Two. I've been
Two.
here
Okay.
too.
We have gone through a lot of changes in annual planning. And so I thought he would be the perfect guest to bring on to talk about how to partner with finance because Hyo does such an amazing job of thinking through go to market and what great strategic planning is. Tiffany and Hyo have not met before,
Uh-huh.
which continues to be our theme. And I'm excited about that because I think the questions and the conversation's better when we've got some new people in the room.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Hio, for joining. It's so great to meet you. I partner with finance so closely in all the work that I do in my role. So I always love getting new perspectives from finance team members and leaders on how they see things work best because it just informs for me how I should think about working through things. So I would love to learn a little bit more about you and your background and how you got into that position.
Perfect. So, first off, thanks for having me. I take it for what it is. It'll just be my perspective. I am not a master at finance, but I've been in it for a while. So, I started at Ernst& Young as an accountant and did that for about 4 years. And then I quickly jumped over. At the time, it was like blown up. And so they were creating an M&A arm and they were like, hey, you want to go join the M&A team? And I said, absolutely. And I kind of stuck in M&A for probably a good 15 years. And so I ran a corp dev team. I worked on Microsoft's M&A team, did a whole bunch of stuff, and then kind of got tired of all that. And I said, I kind of now want to go run my own shop in finance. And so I jumped ship, started out running an accounting and finance team. And this is probably now my third startup that I'm at. Hopefully it has legs to do something great. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, I love that you start with you're not a master of finance. I think that I'll debate you on that by the end of this episode, but it's good. Like we all don't think of ourselves as like the masters of anything, but I mean, you have so much rich background there. So I'm really excited to get like your unique point of views on how to partner on stuff like annual planning. Like M&A is just is such a Kelly and I've talked about it, like such a specific version almost of annual planning. So I feel like you're gonna have a lot of good nuggets today.
I hope so. We'll see.
The other thing I love about your background, Hyo, and that I think so important for the listener is the last 3 years in tech have been really difficult, and the playbook has been totally flipped. And one thing that impresses me most about Hyo is that you really thought through those changes and were really proactive in guiding the go to market teams on what good looks like there. So I think there's going to be a lot of good nuggets on, as we like to say in enablement in my background, what good looks like when it comes to thinking about this really changing landscape. So with that, I'm going to start with my first question. Navigating growth against your cost envelope. Oh, how many conversations have we had around this? What is your philosophy around the balance between how much growth you can achieve, but also staying within that cost envelope?
So this is not a simple, straightforward question. I mean, it sounds so simple at the outset. I think the reality is, to your point, if you think back the last couple of years, tech got smashed pretty hard. And I think for those who are high flying before the bubble kind of burst, it was truly like, doesn't matter how much you burn, it's growth at all costs. As long as you grow fast, everyone was like, just burn all the cash you'd like. We'll just write you another check. Like life is super easy at that point. And everyone's just throwing money into every cylinder. And I think literally overnight, that entirely flipped, where it was like, we want everyone to now pivot. Cash just became really expensive for all the investors. We're not going to fund anything that's outside of AI. So figure out what you're going to do with what you have left. And I think most startups probably got caught flat-footed on that and was like, this is really hard. And I kind of think about it as it's like that child who has been given everything that they wanted their entire life. And at 18, the parents walked in and said, you know what? Starting from today, you're going to get a real job and you're cut off. And they're like, what? But I drive a Ferrari and I only know how to eat caviar. I don't know what this means. And it's like, go figure it out. And I think for tech, it really was like that. It was that drastic of a shift. So in that moment, the very first thing I think most companies probably thought about is, holy, how do I like reshift my brain on that one? Like, what is the new game, and how do we play this, and how do we survive? So survival probably became the first thing, is making sure you have enough cash to last. And that also meant a lot of companies had to pare down and get to a size that they can actually support for a good long runway. So that was probably first thing, was surviving and making sure you get back to shape. That's hard. That comes with a ton of change, lots of emotions, lots of people dynamics, and it's always hard being like the bearer of bad news. I think people are like, God, finance always just wants to cut everything. And I'm like,
I'm not gonna lie, Hio, there were times where I was like, "Can I cancel my meeting? Because I know he
I
doesn't have good news.
totally. They're like,
I
whenever
don't
I
wanna
see
hear what he
your
has to
name,
tell me."
they're like, whenever I see Hyo, it's usually not the best news. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, hey, I need you to work with me. We're trying to get to a good spot.
You always acknowledged it. You were a very good partner about it.
Thank you. So yeah, that was really hard. And I think now that we're kind of a bit past that, the formula changes now for us. I think, especially at Highspot, it's no longer, you actually see me not saying it's about cost cuts anymore. I want people to be balanced, but it's now, how do we fuel for growth again, but do it in an efficient way? And so the game is starting to change again a bit. And now it's like, how do you become efficient, have cost control, and do high growth? And you're looking for pockets where you can unlock productivity. And so that's kind of how it's kind of shifted over the pendulum. So the reality, when you ask that question, it depends on the state that your company is in, what you're trying to achieve. And then ultimately, I want it all. Like, I'm greedy. I want the high growth, and I want us to be efficient, so that if you are going to get to a point where you whether the public markets or try to go for an IPO, you have to show efficiency and high growth right now to be able to go out, which is also why there aren't that many IPOs at the moment, is because they're like, ooh, not quite there yet. And so I think there's going to be a whole bunch that start to come out over the next 2-3 years.
I think from a go-to-market perspective, exactly what you were just saying around that, finding those pockets of like growth with the blend of high productivity in that planning season right now, we're all kind of tasked with doing that. But then what ends up happening, and Kelly and I've talked about a little bit about this in some of the episodes so far, is everyone has their own ideas. Everyone kind of comes up with this, like, and you get convinced, like you sell yourself, like, this is it. I'm going to create this much growth. I just need all of these things. And everyone's moving in different directions. And at least in my experience, finance ends up being the one, especially when you don't have program management, Kelly, like we talked about before, like finance ends up playing a big role in like managing those pieces. What tools have you found to be effective in kind of like that oversight of all the different pieces you're working with?
Man, I think we don't have a fancy tooling system for kind of PMing this big project. And to your point, there's so many different stakeholders that go down. For me, everything starts, especially at Highspot, we probably start heavy CEO awareness of like, hey, I want to know what you guys are trying to architect and what you're solving for. Let's make sure we're aligned at the top. And I think executive alignment is important no matter what company you're at, what annual planning process. Start from the top, make sure all your execs are aligned on what you're trying to ultimately achieve. Then you start peeling everything back. And in our case, we have Graham and he has his directs, and quickly you fall within that sales executive team and trying to align them on where we're headed, what we want to see. And the thing that's, I think sales naturally gravitates towards generally that I've seen is, we're good about putting in more headcount to fuel more growth, where they're not
We always have the
super
headcount
Yeah.
requests,
totally,
always.
Yeah.
give me more heads. If you give me
Yeah.
more heads, then I can do more growth. And I think as you really think about efficiency metrics, the rule of 40, your CAC, your efficiency, all these things that like the public markets actually start to care about, they're like, well, I actually want you to do the growth, but I want you to do it in a very small envelope. And that's what it's like, ooh, that's a lot harder to do. And so when we start to do that, we do first off benchmarking, lots of different benchmarks. We read lots of different reports that give you different lens of like, hey,
Where do you get those benchmarks? So just if you're a
I make them
listener and
up.
you're doing this for the first, you're just starting, where are you
So
getting those benchmarks?
I would do two, three different views. So Meritech is good in that you can go pull and do filters of companies of roughly your size. What does their profile look like for public company comp set? So that gives you the public company comp set right now. That's probably your hardest lens because they have the most scrutiny to be efficient and grow. And that'll be your most conservative right now. Like that's our North
Mm.
Star. And you can cut it then like median, top quartile, etc., to get an idea of where you're at and where you need to be. Iconic is usually really good at publishing a ton of uh, private company insights. And what they do is they survey a ton of different companies, get it, and then package up a bunch of different, and they do a lot on the go to market side. So that's a different one. And then obviously you can also go and hire firms that generally help you. The last thing that we sometimes do is do a LinkedIn scrub where we have a vendor who then scrubs various company profiles and we can get an idea of how the people org is structured within that company.
Interesting.
And that gives you a third data set in terms of like, companies that are in our space look kind of like that. And obviously there's no one answering it, but then you start to triangulate of, we seem really off here. Why are we off there? And is that the right investment for us to make or not as we try to get more efficient?
On this tangent, one of the things that I've been using this planning cycle, because we're a small and mighty team where I'm at, is Perplexity. So we have introduced AI to help us inform some of that research. And Perplexity is great because it gives you its sources and it goes through and like triangulates a lot of that for you. So you're using that like LLM AI, but to gather some of that market research, but yet to compare like how it does against some of the sources that you're referencing and like how well it's balancing some of the classic information we've used with some of the new tools that exist out there.
I love that. I wrote it down because I actually want to see
Talk about
how amazing
efficiency.
would
You
it
just
be.
got another AI employee for free.
Totally. I could ask it questions. It's going to give me the answers. I've always told my team, I go, hey, I think I'm going to get replaced at some point with AI because you're just going to start asking it these benchmarking questions. And you're like, I don't need Hyo anymore. AI will tell me the answers to it. And so what do I need Hyo for?
That's why you have to have a strong point of view. That's what separates you from AI.
But the one thing that I think I do okay at, and Chris, our CFO, always says this. He goes, the one thing that you're actually pretty decent at is changing hearts and minds. And I go, that's what I feel like the last 2 years has been about, is with all the changes that have happened in the market, in order to be pretty successful at doing annual planning, with the amount of change we needed to do, it was about your ability to actually go work with everyone and help them see the big picture and then try to work to a plan that actually gets there.
Yeah, I mean, the conversations that have had to happen in so many of our planning sessions across all companies, I think in the last few years, especially if you were in tech, were emotional. I mean, I remember, I think I stormed out of one or two. um,
Doesn't sound like you
Pretty
at all.
upset because it's people and efficiency, and you have things that you're used to doing. It was, the easier things to cut, like, "Oh, our SKO is not going to be as great as it usually is. We can't spend as much money. We can't do it in person." To things of like, hey, people you really value and trust on your team might not have a role here. And so I do think finding that balance where go to market leaders can really trust finance and know that you understand the people behind the decisions is so important. So yes, I agree that you do that really well, and you're comfortable having those more emotional conversations at times.
It's brutal. Yeah, this past 2 years for sure. And Kelly, you're not unique by any stance from that perspective. Like there's been a lot of people with lots of emotions at every level, starting from the very top. Like it is, even for like if you think about founding CEO, like it's your baby that you build. And
Totally.
to be like, hey, we got to do things differently to make sure we get to the next level. That's really hard. It gets really emotional, and it gets yeah.
I mean,
Managing that is
but
difficult.
it's great when people are emotional. I mean, it's understandable when the founding CEO is or any founders in the organization, but when you have leaders that are emotional, it means they care. Like they care deeply
Totally.
about what's happening. And so I think it's a great skill set that the hearts and minds, like, ability to change hearts and minds, because when you're doing that, it means you have a team of people who really want the company to succeed, like at their core, not just as part of their day job.
Totally.
So I cut you off earlier, but I think it was a good tangent. But I'll bring it back around. We were talking a little bit about who you bring into the planning process, and you talked about it starting with the CEO typically and then going to that executive team. When you think about go to market planning, who do you really rely on to be in the room? And who do you think maybe sometimes gets missed that you would suggest to the listener, make sure you have these people on?
Yeah, for it's a good question. I think for go to market, if you have a really strong rev ops person, they usually become your first, kind of like your primary partner. And so in our case, Jody this year has been a phenomenal partner. She's data
Love
driven.
Jody. She's wonderful. We'll have her on the pod at some point.
She's great. We could not be successful without her. And so it's literally like right hand, left hand. Like we work together to try to influence and drive change throughout. If the RevOps person is strong, they'll be a great partner because they obviously are embedded within the sales team. And so they can work with all the leaders to build the operating plans of like, this is the how. I can easily say, hey, here's the what. Can you go solve the how? And she's off running in the back, comes and packages it all up. And then we do alignment sessions all the way back up to say, hey, these are the plans. Does that make sense? Do you really think that's the best investment? Or do you think this money is better spent elsewhere? And I think that's the hard conversation. But what's been good about this year's process is I think there's a lot more coordination in the sales VP level. And so they're all talking to each other. And I think in the past, what was harder is you have to go hunt and peck, like, hey, I talked to this person, and then you go chase over there, like, I'm the translator. I'm gonna go talk to this person. I'm like, by the time you get there, it's like playing a game of telephone. Like that message you heard from the front, the message you heard over there are completely different. And so one thing I've just made a concerted effort this year is we're gonna get people, even though the calendars are tough, get them in a room so we could talk about the same issue and we don't have to guess what they heard from someone else. Is let's just have the hard conversations all up front. And to your point, Kelly, like I want every VP and in the sales team generally align. And then underneath that, there's probably certain critical operating roles. If enablement doesn't have a VP role, which I think generally it should, if you don't have a enablement leader, you probably need an enablement leader in there. If you don't have the pipeline ADR leader in there, you probably want them to be informed at some point, but it's like a layering effect. You start from the top and then you make sure the key operating roles underneath it also support the vision and strategy that you guys are trying to execute against.
I love that framing you did of like finance provides the what, and then you get to that like operations go to market leader and they help provide the how. And I think what's missing to connect our tangent that we went off on is the why, and getting all those people together, especially on the go to market side, to truly believe in the what and how is what creates the why. You get that full buy in, and that buy in is so important for the actual success of the execution of the plan.
Tiffany, I think you couldn't have said it any better. I think the thing that I always start with is painting the here's what we're trying to get to. Like whether it's a 2, 3 year timeline, this is what good looks like for us. Here's where we're at today. That also means we got to click step in this manner. And then you have to get buy-in that that's the right level of, wait, is it a little step this next year or is it a big step? What size step are we taking and why? And the why, I think everyone should always start with the why. Why are we doing what we're doing and why is it going to be this hard? Because if you don't have alignment there, you will have dysfunction and people dragging all over and not trying to figure out how to best solve for the why.
Yeah. We're great at talking about how things should work in theory or in silos, and it makes it sound like it always works that way or it's magic at all these companies that we've been at. But the reality is that we all fail from time to time, and we've been through those failures, and they inform how we think about things. I'm curious, what's the biggest failure you've been through that's kind of created the most learnings for you during the planning process, and maybe how did your perspective uniquely shift after that?
failures. When I first joined Highspot, it was a big year of change that we had to go through. And I was still learning all the leaders and all the different personalities. And I think a few things that you realize over the course of the year, verbal commitments, memories get kind of short if they're all verbal commits. And so, as the new guy, you're like, "Ah, we talked about it, like we're aligned." And then you go back 4, 5, 6 months later and they're like, what? We had what conversation? And I'm like, God, like I should have done better about memorializing those verbal commits. And so it turned into this big whole thing where we started to like document all of these things. And I'm like, God, that's so much work. But I think the reality of it is, I think people genuinely have good intent for the most part. And so, and we're operating so fast that it is easy to also hear something and not have it. It's like looking at the same event from two different viewpoints. Doesn't always like match up the stories. And so making sure that I do a really good job of memorializing the information that was shared and the commitments that were made. I think that's a lesson that I learned is even with the best intent, just make sure you have it down and you have alignment on it so that you can always go back and be like, no, we did agree on this. Come on. You gotta do that.
That was when I got asked this question by Tiffany a couple weeks ago. That was my answer as well.
Hey,
So
was
I was
it?
just thinking, I was like, I know all about the Highspot decision log. I've heard about this a few times now.
That's funny. And that holds true today. I just make sure that people are aware and it's memorialized and it's published for everyone.
I didn't tell you this, Kelly, but I mean, I'm in the middle of planning right now, and I woke up on Monday morning in like a panic where I replayed a conversation that I had last week around segmentation. And to your point, like we were moving so fast, we were talking about so many topics that for whatever reason, this popped in my head on Monday morning. It woke me up that I had said yes to a question someone answered, and I realized that they had had 2 points to that question, and only one of them was actually true. And for whatever reason, at 5 a.m., that realization hit. And so I immediately was, texting people yesterday to say, like, can we back up on that? Can we revisit that conversation? Because you're just moving so quickly that it's so easy in this planning phase to like hear the part that like you're answering the question before you hear the end of it. And like you're lucky if you all of a sudden replay that in the back of your head. And I think those mistakes are just unfortunately so common to make at this point of the year.
annual planning scaries.
Yeah. But it sounds like a decision log is how you get out of the annual planning scaries.
I mean, it helps.
It
Yeah.
helps for sure. My medium is decks, and so I try to make sure it lives in some deck. The thing that I got a little sloppy with is I'll take a deck and then people want to like rev things in it, so I just use the existing deck and rev it again.
Mm.
And then so the old log is kind of like gone. And so I'm like, ooh, no, I'm gonna now publish these things and make sure I don't overwrite the stuff I just presented.
Yeah.
It's
That was
important.
actually the answer I got was like the person I was talking to was like, "It's in the deck," and I understood what you meant. I realized and so it was all okay.
Yeah.
Everything's okay in planning
Good.
for me. No one should be.
So, Hio, we didn't prep for this question, but I have this question for you because I'm really curious. We're headed into 2025. Everyone's thinking about annual planning. There are going to be winners and losers of the year. What do you think the best companies are thinking about in their planning process to make sure that they're successful next year?
Man, this was a tough one a little bit in that, again, I think it depends what that company is going for. Like, are you a company that's low growth and we need to get costs under control? They're going to have a very different profile than those who likely have double-digit growth at the moment and have cash kind of in the bank to sustain their future. So it depends on where they're at in the curve. I would hope by now, assuming that they're not on the block to just get acquired. So that's one way out. You see M&A pick up a ton right now because there's a lot of folks that don't have enough to weather, and so they're trying to position themselves for a buyout. So let's assume you're not in that game. You're in the, hey, I still have runway, I still have cash. I think the big thing for them to figure out is one, is there a strategic play where M&A can come in, where you can combine forces with someone and own more of the category, have more market share, have higher velocity and get a little more of a scale benefit right out of the gate? Is there a complementary business that we can buy that kind of unlocks you? That's something that I think strategically every company should be looking at. I think second, for those who can just do it organically, it is going to be the question of how much can you tolerate burn wise? What is the efficiency level you can get? And how do I feel my top line growth again? And I think it's that balance that you're always going to look at. You need to make sure you're doing it in a productive way. But if your sales and marketing motion is turning out to be pretty efficient, you have good participation, you have good productivity, then you're at a point probably where you can start fueling that engine again for growth. And that's the ideal place to be. Is you want to be always be like, I have another dollar. Am I going to put it in generally product or sales? And you want to fuel it. You want to put it where you think it unlocks you the best.
Yeah, I think one thing that you hit on that I think is really interesting in this space is being prepared for growth too, and all the things that come once you start growing. And I think there's a lot of companies that maybe caught flat-footed in the opposite way than they were 3 years ago or 2 years ago.
And I think in this market, I would say, and we're doing it at Highspot, I always say I'm going to feel behind the growth versus before it was like, get ahead and just keep fueling ahead of the growth. The thing that you almost have a commit like, hey, here's the unlock points. If I see your productivity hit this and you have a pipe of this, then I'm going to start throwing more at you. And I think it's just being cautious. We're going to invest for growth, but you want to see the improvements from a productivity perspective to make it efficient. I want just every dollar to be efficient.
I love those unlock points and like the commitment and agreement between finance and sales. I think sales loves a goal. And so you
Yeah.
give them a goal to hit that lets them grow and lets them do the other things they want to do.
And when you
It's just a
sold them
good
on the
understanding.
why, salespeople just see the vision. And so, like, why won't you give me this headcount now? Like, I know that this market is going to work or that, like, this is going to hit. And so, the goals are good. They're good parameters to have to kind of lean towards. So you're not saying no to the growth, which I think is people like you've talked about the shift out of the last few years, but I don't know that everyone has fully mentally made that shift as well. Like they're used to that high growth opportunity. And so a lot of people still struggle with the idea that like we're not funding ahead of growth. We're cautious around productivity. And so I feel like everyone's still shifting there for sure.
For sure. It's a constant conversation of, can I get it now? And we're like, can I see a little more? And I think the other thing is, if you got a new strategy that's coming, a lot of times it's just a question of what's the minimal viable. And I think there should be a discussion. There's a lot of times we might want to overbuild out of the gate. And I'm like, cool, that gets pretty risky if it doesn't work out. So is there a way to still see and kind of test it, do an A/B testing a bit? And when it works, that's what you fuel. And I think even the A/B testing concept, it's not new, but I think for a while resourcing was just so easy
Yeah.
that everyone was like, just we'll
Just
go.
go.
If we fail, we fail. And I'm like, well, how about we do it like
Maybe.
contain that just a little bit and then
Pilot's a good thing.
totally.
I think one thing that may be hurting those conversations right now is a lot of what happened in the last 2 years was kind of sold as temporary. And so I think if you're a sales leader, and maybe the reason you hear pushback from sales leaders right now is there was this belief that we're just going to slow down for a couple of years. We're just going to get efficient for a couple of years. And I think positivity is changing. People are looking forward. And so they are hopeful that the rules haven't changed, but the rules are going to stay the same. I think the markets are going to require that. And so that acceptance that this is now the norm, it
Yeah.
takes some time to like
Yeah.
fully absorb.
You said it super well, Kelly. I think um, it's not a V shape, unfortunately. I think rates will slowly click back up. I think if you don't have an AI story, you're not like the golden child at the moment. And so you're right. For those who are the golden children, they will still get money. For the rest of us, we're going to have to probably slog it out a little bit longer before the market starts to rebound to where it gets super easy.
Okay. So this is the final question, Hugh. Are you ready for it?
Final question.
And the great thing about the final question is you're actually asking the question.
Yes.
So
My
we
favorite part.
always ask each of our guests to leave the listener with a point of view question. What is something that they should think about after they're done with this podcast to make sure that they are creating a point of view, they are driving the right go-to-market strategies at their own organization? So what question should the listener ask themselves?
So I think there's two like super high level questions for me that I think everyone should ask. And I think the first one for me is not super authentic or genuine. It's, do you understand the strategic goals and vision of either the
Genuine and
go-to-market?
authentic. It might not be new.
Yeah, it's not new. Definitely not new. But do you understand what you're trying to achieve as a company and as a go-to-market engine? Number one. And then I think the second question that everyone needs to ask is, it's really easy to just keep doing what you already do. It's the path of least resistance. It's the most familiar. I think the thing that everyone should ask is, am I adapting and changing things fast enough to better meet that strategic goal? And I think that's a harder thing to do, but it's something that we should keep challenging ourselves to always do.
I love that. I feel like I'm going to go back and think about those right now before I get to this next iteration of our plan.
Make sure we got those nailed. Well, Hyo, thank you for joining us. I know that doing a podcast, you said, was not your thing, but I
It is your thing.
I think it is your thing.
It goes on your
I have
LinkedIn
a feeling you've
profile.
got a future podcast in your future.
No, so not my jam, but I appreciate both of you guys were fantastic. So thank you for that.
Thank you for joining us. I know you're busy. I know you just had board meetings and you're in the middle of annual planning. So I know you have a lot going on, but we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Revenue Insiders. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you did, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a minute to leave us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners. Thank you.